Hey everyone. So you probably are hearing in the news that the Vatican has approved of a new Mayan rite, and you might be confused as to what exactly this is. I want to show you a video where Father Deacon Anthony Dragani and I discuss this in detail and show it to you in video format and offer some commentary. This is a video that was done about a year ago, but it's still going to be beneficial as this is coming up in the news now. So take a look at it. I hope you enjoy. Welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show here on Reason and Theology, joined by Father Deacon Anthony Dragani, who is going to discuss the question of a Mayan Rite Mass with us here in Catholicism. There's been news that Pope Francis has approved the Mayan Rite Mass, and there are people who are very concerned that it crosses the line and that there is idolatry being incorporated into the liturgical actions of the church. And so there have been a lot of concerns. A lot of people have expressed concerns over this. And so here to kind of settle the question is Father Deacon Anthony Dragani. Father Deacon, welcome back to the show. How are you?
Great, Michael. Thanks for having me.
I'm always happy to have you on. As I tell you every time, I learn every time you come on. Um, I've had you on the show a handful of times to discuss similar questions. We've done the Pachamama ceremony. We have
Yes.
done the Canadian ceremony that Pope
hmm
Francis was a part of a few years ago, I want to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then now we're doing the Mayan Rite ceremony. Can you maybe introduce us to this? Because again, a lot of people are very concerned that there are elements of idolatry being incorporated, and the Pope has approved these things. So maybe just start us out with an introduction to what exactly is taking place here. What's going
Sure. Sure. So first, it's helpful to understand a bit about the circumstances,
on?
the context of this. Context makes a huge difference.
Okay.
So in this case, um, the drama takes place in Mexico in a specific region. Now, I can't pronounce the names properly, but I'm going to say Chiapas, perhaps.
Hmm.
I'm probably mispronouncing it. But in that particular region, there's a large number of Mayans, indigenous Mexicans of the Mayan culture.
Hmm.
And the Mayans also aren't just in that particular part of Mexico, but in Belize as well. There's some pockets of them as well. But the issue is that the Mayans, the native Mayans in that particular region, were Catholic for many centuries. But about 20 or 30 years ago, there was a huge influx of evangelical Protestant missionaries. And they came in there and began to make tremendous inroads among the indigenous people.
Hmm.
And there are a couple of reasons for that, but one of the big ones was probably language.
Hmm.
So at that point in time, the official language of any Roman Catholic Mass in Mexico was Spanish. They
Hmm.
all had to be conducted in Spanish. There was no permission for a Mass in other languages in Mexico. The problem is among the Mayan peoples, and in this one state in Mexico in particular, about 60% of the population is Mayan. And among that population, the majority of them do not speak Spanish.
Hmm.
Most of them only know their native languages. They don't know Spanish. So because the Mass was done in a language that people didn't understand and they had a hard time connecting with it, it made them easier prey than perhaps they otherwise would have been to these particular missionaries. But what compounded the fact was a serious lack of clergy. Apparently, there are very few priests in that region, very few. There are some, but not enough. Many priests are on like a rotating schedule where they go to one parish in cycles, and perhaps to get around to every parish once every 10 or 12 weeks.
Hmm.
There are more deacons. A lot of parishes will have a deacon, but even that's not a given. There are many parishes that don't have any clergy at all, and they're led essentially by lay catechists who do communion services. And they may see a priest or a deacon once in a while. So the lack of clergy compounded with language issues are believed to be some of the reasons why the evangelical Protestants really made inroads. I read one story. It was actually about a nun, and this nun is of a Mayan descent. She's a Mayan person. She grew up in one of these villages, and the whole village was Catholic. She became a sister. very involved in helping people.
Mhm.
She was saying that what happened was one day a van pulled into her village of evangelical missionaries, and they came in there and began teaching against Catholicism. And within a matter of years, the whole village became Protestant, and they actually drove out anyone who would not convert. The villagers did. And she said it's at the point now that if anyone wants to move into the village, they get interviewed by the village elders, and if they're Catholic, they're not allowed in. They've all become very hardcore anti-Catholic evangelicals. So this is a huge problem, huge. At this point in time, in the country of Mexico, this particular state now has the lowest percentage of Catholics
Mm.
because evangelicals have made such huge inroads. So that's a large part of what prompted this. The first step that really took place was in 2013. Pope Francis gave his permission for them to translate the Mass into the Mayan languages.
Okay.
And there are different languages, 2 or 3 that are spoken.
Mhm.
So this was a big step when in 2013 they were officially approved for these languages. And that was meant to be a step towards bringing people back. But again, it's a very difficult situation. So some people have proposed that they make certain minor adaptations to the Roman Catholic Mass that incorporate elements of the Mayan culture. And this is seen as perhaps a way of connecting the Mass with the people and perhaps stopping some of the bleeding that's going on with the people literally hemorrhaging out of parishes because of the situation. That's what's behind it. So actually an attempt to stop what they see as a massive exodus of Catholics into these evangelical churches. And one of the other reasons given, well, by the evangelicals when they would come is not only would they teach against Catholic doctrines, but they would say, so where's your pastor? And the people would say, well, pastor comes by once every 8 or 10 weeks. And they would say, well, join our church. You can have a pastor here all the time. And that's one of the other things too. So one of the things that's incorporated with this whole movement is a greater role given to lay catechists. They're given a more of a sense of authority, more of a sense of prominence. And that's whether or not that's good is debatable, right? You can debate whether or not that's good, but that's what's going on here. Now, most of the media attention around this has centered on the allegation that this is designed to promote paganism and idolatry. I've seen a lot of stories on Catholic news sites, stories on Catholic YouTube channels about how this is Pope Francis's next step in converting Catholicism into a pagan religion, trying to make us idolatrous. And that's a common charge I've seen. Even well-meaning news sites are reporting that this is designed to incorporate pagan elements into the Mass. If that's true, that's a huge, huge problem. Now, I personally was suspicious as to whether or not that's true, because in my experience, the Vatican isn't actively trying to de-Christianize Christianity, despite media reports. We've talked about the Pachamama fiasco. That really wasn't what it appeared to be. If anything, it was about poor communication. Same thing with the Canada situation. That was about poor communication. This seems to be a similar situation in that people are misunderstanding things. The news outlets that are reporting it, though, I'm personally not sure of their intentions. And I'll tell you why. It seems to me that what is actually happening is being purposely distorted in a way that seems almost malicious. I hope I'm wrong on that. I hope it's just incompetence or misunderstanding. But the magnitude of misinformation I've seen on this, it appears almost malicious. And it makes me think that we as Christians need to get our priorities straight. We need to make sure that we're disciples of Christ rather than the disciples of an ideology. And we're all guilty of this. I am as well. There are certain beliefs I hold dear. And it's very tempting sometimes to put the ideology you believe in on par with your Christian faith. And then when you do that, it's tempting to distort stories to fit a narrative that supports your ideology. I've done that. We all have. But media outlets in particular should be striving for objectivity. The problem is, as disciples of Christ, we should be pursuing truth. We should be looking for truth. We can't allow ourselves to become comfortable in ideologies and looking for ways to bolster the narrative of the ideology. And I think that's what's happening here. I think a lot of these media sites have issues with Pope Francis and his policies, perhaps for good reason. But when stories like this come along, they're tempted, I think, to present it in the worst way possible and even to distort the story because it bolsters an ideology they believe in, which is an anti-Francis ideology, again, possibly for good reason.
Which is a theme that we've been seeing over and over and over. I mean, I've been exploring that here on this channel.
I've had people attack me over these videos. Had some pretty bad attacks after the last one, pretty serious attacks.
On the Canada one?
Yes. One of the worst attacks I ever experienced was on that one. From, I'm not going to name names, but a pretty well-known Catholic YouTuber. And what I would say, people don't want to be challenged on this. They want to believe that their narrative is the correct one because it supports their ideology. I'm going to say this right now. If Pope Francis really is trying to de-Christianize the Catholic Church, if he really is trying to introduce the worship of other gods, I will be the first to call him out. I'll be the first to condemn it, because my loyalty is not to an ideology. I strive to be loyal to Jesus Christ and to be his disciple. If Pope Francis really is trying to destroy the gospel by making us polytheists, he needs to be called out. But I don't see that happening. And part of it might be my perspective. As we talked about before, I'm a religion professor and I teach courses on world religions. So I see things a bit differently. I can understand how these religions can in some ways be enculturated into the Catholic faith, perhaps in ways that other people can't. I think for some people, when they see something weird or different in their mind, in other words, something not European, they assume it must be pagan and demonic. But we can't make that assumption.
Yeah, and this is a theme that I've also explored on this channel, not only with yourself, but also in other videos. The church's policy on enculturation. It has a very, very long history of taking elements that belong to the secular world and sometimes even pagan religions, purifying them of their idolatry, and then using whatever is good left over from them for the kingdom of God. This isn't even just a uniquely Christian thing. This is something we find in the Old Testament that the Israelites did, and God allowed them to do and did under his direction and instructions. So that kind of, purification of elements that are in society that are initially associated with paganism, purifying them and then using them for the advancement of the kingdom of God is an Old Testament theme. It's a New Covenant theme, New Testament theme, and it is a very rich history of the Christian tradition. Again, purifying certain things from their idolatrous roots. But some are going to be concerned that some of the elements that are being brought into the church aren't purified of their idolatrous roots, and therefore are not only illicit but sinful in nature. So hopefully we're going to be exploring that here, because again, some people might in theory recognize that, yeah, sure, there's some things that are neutral. So say, for instance, the wedding ring, that comes from paganism, but obviously it's not in and of itself idolatrous, and you could purify it from its pagan roots and then use it for a Christian sacrament. Some people would recognize that in theory and say, yeah, that's true, but I don't think that's what's going on here with Pope Francis. So that's one of the things that I'm hoping we're going to tackle.
And that is a legitimate question too. At what point does enculturation go too far? I mean, is it possible to enculturate to the point that the Christian meaning is watered down or compromised? And that is a legitimate concern that people can have.
Yeah.
And there should be discussion on that for sure.
Yeah. Now I understand. I think you have a video that you're going to show us and that we're going to walk through. I don't know if you're ready for that yet.
Before that, I want to show an image.
Okay. Yeah.
So
if you have a share screen, all right. Is it?
I see present at the bottom.
Yeah, present at the bottom.
And I'm going to share. It's actually a file. What, I just loaded like a video file?
You could either share screen. I would just do share screen and like open up the video image and just show it on your screen, kind of like you would show a video, but just do that with an image instead.
Okay.
I would
So
do
if
it
I
like that.
hit present, hit
Yeah.
share screen,
Uh-huh.
and then I'm going to.
You'll select the monitor.
Okay.
Yeah.
1 second here.
Sure.
I appear to have accidentally moved the file to the wrong place.
No problem. No problem. Let's see. I'm looking through the chat as well. Yeah, looks like the chat is pretty active. That's good. And by the way, y'all hold off on questions. We'll take questions at the end. So maybe hold off on those. I'll let y'all know when to start putting those in the chat.
Okay, I got it now.
Okay. Yeah, so hit present, hit share screen, select the monitor that you want to share, and it should come up on my end when you do that.
All right.
Is
You're seeing it?
No, I don't see it yet. So that's odd. Normally it will come up for me to approve it. Try it one more time.
Okay.
Okay, there it is. All right.
Great. You see it?
Yes, I do.
I'm going to make this large.
Okay. Yeah, if you can maybe zoom in. There we go.
How's that?
Yeah, that'll work right there.
So this is from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and I think it's a very good statement about all of this. The Catholic Church recognizes in other religions that search among shadows and images for the God who is unknown yet near, since he gives life and breath in all things and wants all men to be saved. Thus, the Church considers all goodness and truth found in these religions as a preparation for the gospel and given by him who enlightens all men that they may at length have life. So I can stop sharing that now.
Yeah.
And I mean, the point of it is that Catholic teaching is other religions have things in them that might be shadows of the truth.
Sure.
And the church has never hesitated to identify elements of that and bring them into Catholicism and enculturation. The worst thing you can do is go into a new culture and say, okay, we're here to teach you about Jesus. Everything you've ever believed is completely wrong. You have to throw it all out. You have to destroy all of your artwork, all of your literature, and start from ground zero. That would never work.
Yeah.
That would never work.
Right. Yeah, which is why the church is not taking that policy. And yeah, this is reminiscent of the seeds of the word concept of St. Justin Martyr in the early church. And in fact, I did a whole video on this. It's called Catholicism's Approach to Other Cultures. I'll put it in the show notes. Y'all certainly check it out, but it will kind of give you a foundation for what we're discussing here. Because I not only go over the concept itself, but also instances of this in church history that are certainly worth considering. Yeah.
So next, I want to show a video.
Okay.
And before I do that, a little context. So news stories have come out about this, for quite a while, but there's been no updates of any kind since March.
Okay.
So the stories in March were claiming that this new rite was coming, that it had been put together by the bishops in this particular province of Mexico, and that in April they were going to present it to the Mexican Bishops' Conference. And then from there, hopefully in May, they were going to take it to the Vatican for approval.
Okay.
That's what the stories were saying. As far as I can tell, there's been no movement on this since March. If things are happening, they're behind the scenes, but there have been no updates. So where this is at, I don't know. But what is important to realize is they're already doing this on an experimental basis in this particular diocese in Chiapas, Mexico. So the bishop there is already implementing this liturgical, not reform, but liturgical addition, I would say. And they're doing it experimentally with permission from the Mexican Bishops' Conference to see how it works. But nothing has really happened officially that I am aware of since March. So I'm not sure where it's at, but they're doing it in this one place. Now, the actual text of the adaptations are not available anywhere. I could not find them.
Okay.
Now, a lot of what I'm going on is actually an interview I read with one of the main bishops.
Okay.
I believe it was the bishop of this particular diocese. He gave an interview in which he explained what this entailed, and he laid out what it was, piece by piece. There's a pretty good explanation. Now, here's where things get murky. one of the major media sites that's been reporting on this story managed to get a copy of the actual proposal.
Okay.
And here's how they did it. They messaged one of the bishops involved, the cardinal, I believe, of the nearby archdiocese, and explained they were a news site and we're reporting on this. And he very kindly sent them a copy of the proposal. So they have it, but they have not shared it. They have not put a link to it anywhere. You can't get it from them. So you have to kind of trust their interpretation of it. And their interpretation is very negative. Their interpretation is this is an implementation of paganism where the purpose is to get people to worship gods other than Jesus and the Trinity.
Okay.
That's their interpretation, and they have the text, right?
Okay.
But what they're claiming is in there is totally different from what the bishop said in the interview. The bishop in the interview was very clear that this was not meant to change the Roman Rite. It was not meant to change the Mass. It's not a rite, by the way. The media was presenting this as a Mayan Rite. It's not. What it's meant to be is the Roman Mass with a couple of adaptations.
Okay.
If anything, it could be called the Mayan usage. In stories about this, they're talking about the so-called Zaire Rite. There is no Zaire. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. Is that how it's pronounced? I don't know. There is no Zaire Rite. There is a Zaire usage, which is a specific missal approved for diocese in Zaire. But it's the Roman Rite with a couple of little additions. Technically, it's called a usage of the Roman Rite. It's not a new rite. So there is no proposal for a Mayan Rite, to equal the Byzantine Rite or the Maronite Rite. There's no proposal for a Mayan Mass even. All this is a proposal for is the Roman Catholic Novus Order Mass with three main adaptations. Three. So when I talk about this, I'm going on what the bishop said in the interview, but I also found a video of it.
Okay.
Now, this video is from one of the parishes in the diocese that's already using it.
Okay.
And the video I have is from last month. It's from May.
Okay. Recent.
Now, it's the only video I could find of this.
Okay.
It's from this particular parish because most of the parishes in this diocese are in very poor regions. Some of them don't even have electricity. There isn't a lot of infrastructure. So most of these parishes are not streaming. But this particular parish is posting its masses online on a weekly basis, apparently. And it's the only example I can find, but they are actually implementing what I read about in the interview in this parish. So we're going to see what it actually is. That's my plan here. And I'm going to kind of show you the key highlights and you'll see how it's different.
You mentioned that their interpretation, the news media, their interpretation of the ceremony is largely negative, whereas the bishop's interpretation or presentation is positive and says it's not idolatry. Well, just to play devil's advocate, some might say, well, yes, sure, the bishop is going to say that, but that doesn't mean that there isn't still idolatrous elements in it.
Right. And I'm sure people are thinking that the bishop has an ulterior motive of some kind. He and Pope Francis are conspiring to make all these people, polytheists, right?
Or just deceived and they don't realize that they're embracing idolatry.
Right. That could be it as well. And one of the difficulties is I don't have the text. So what I'm going to show you is what's going on during the Mass, but I can't interpret the words that are being used because the words being used aren't even in Spanish. They're speaking in this particular native language, this indigenous language that I don't know, that most people don't know. So I cannot tell you what they're saying, but according to the interview with the bishop, everything they're saying is very Christian and very much in line with traditional Christian belief and faith.
So we don't have evidence to the contrary.
Correct. There's no evidence here that they're praying to a pagan god, but I think you'll see in the context of what's going on, what we're witnessing isn't that strange. It's pretty familiar.
Okay. All right. So if somebody is going to make the accusation that the text itself contains prayers to pagan gods, they're going to have to substantiate that claim. They can't simply assume it.
And I'd love to see the text, not a translation, but the original text, because people can make their own translations. I want to see the actual original text. I think it's important to see that before you jump to the conclusion they're praying to pagan gods.
Okay. All right. Well, if you want to show it to us.
So the parish I'm showing you is from the heart of the diocese. It's one of the main parishes in the very center of the diocese. And for this particular Mass, the bishop is with them. He's the main celebrant.
Mhm.
You're going to see the bishop and several deacons. This parish has several deacons. So I'm going to load this up right now. And give me a second.
Mhm. There we go.
Is it there?
Mhm. All right.
All right.
Understand.
I'm going to jump ahead to the beginning.
Okay.
This is a long recording. The Mass itself is an hour and a half long.
Oh, okay.
And they add stuff to it, but they don't subtract anything.
Yeah.
So they're in for a long haul, and they seem to enjoy it. So I'm going to start at 8 minutes and 35 seconds, right when the opening procession is.
Okay.
So right about there. Oh, the volume some. They have like a band in the corner playing music. So this is the opening procession. Now, as they're coming in, one thing that people might notice is the censer being carried is not a traditional censer like we'd use in either the East or the West. It's not on a chain. It's not being swung. It's like almost like a bowl type censer that has the incense burning upward.
Mm-hmm.
But there's the bishop, and there are the participants. So this is the beginning of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're going to see them placing something in front of the altar, and there actually are some candles in front of the altar. It's not really clear here, but we're talking on the floor in front of the altar. Now, one of the elements mentioned in the proposed adaptations is having what's called a Mayan offering, which it's meant to be a place in front of the altar where people place things such as candles, typically 4 candles representing the 4 directions to show the entirety of the earth. Also, they'll place there the fruits of the earth, grain, fruit, things they've grown.
Yeah.
And often incense. So basically candles, incense, fruit. Now, one of the news sites was calling this a Mayan altar. They're saying it was a traditional Mayan altar used to worship pagan gods. But really all it is a place on the floor where they put things. The document apparently calls it a Mayan offering.
What's interesting is you sometimes see this in the Roman Rite outside of this context, and there are some analogous things also in the Eastern tradition, as you know.
So the Mayan offering, being placed in front of the altar, perhaps it has pagan roots, but in this context, it's meant to be presenting things to God.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point of it. They're presenting these things before the altar as offerings to God and thanksgiving for what He's given them.
Which is generally how they did it in the early church.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's one of the first differences people may notice. Now, what's going to happen next is the bishop is going to do the opening prayer, and he has a deacon assisting him. And you'll see in many cases the bishop is speaking in Spanish and the deacon is translating.
Mm-hmm.
The deacons in this parish are indigenous. The bishop is not. But when the bishop begins, after he gives his blessing, you're going to see someone else is going to start talking.
Okay.
Lirios juuncus lejal tilach chacuses Jesucristo pilastus be yakili lajele teoyuk siujo su stiuquot Kutzkalaltach chapan kontontix bentach pastik chulsobail.
And at this point, all we're hearing is a typical Novus Ordo Mass.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing unusual. Okay, we're going to see one of the controversial elements. So I mentioned there were 3 main adaptations. This is one of them.
Okay.
So at the beginning of the Mass, after the introductory rite, we have somebody who's called a principal. And a principal is an elder from the local community, often a lay catechist, somebody who teaches the faith and is well respected in the faith, who will lead the people in prayers as a layperson. And what happens is he will typically come up and kneel before the altar or stand, and he will lead the people in prayers using a specific traditional Mayan way, which involves special intonations. There's a type of loud pleading that goes on. Now, the text of the prayer he's saying, I don't know what it is. From what I read, it's a prayer to God. One thing that concerned people was apparently in the text of the prayer, it mentions the 4 directions. But it's not worshiping them. It's talking about the 4 directions as all things leading to God.
Yeah, the Old Testament also references the 4 directions over and over.
Right. 4 directions doesn't mean you're worshiping a pagan god.
Sure. Right.
So we're going to see him give his prayer as the principle. And again, this is a layman from the local community who teaches the faith. And this is part of the adaptations. And notice, by the way, they're all kneeling on the floor with no kneelers. They're pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
Now notice there's special cadences he's using. He's toning his voice in a special way. That's something that really isn't part of a traditional Catholic Mass.
Yeah.
But to the Mayan people, apparently it's very meaningful from what I read. And to be the principal, you have to be chosen by the pastor and be approved by the bishop.
Okay.
So each parish doesn't just randomly pick somebody. It's somebody who's known to the church, who's personally approved by the bishop.
Yeah.
And in many cases, this is somebody who's teaching the faith when there's no clergy around. Now, he actually goes on for 5 minutes. He goes on for 5 minutes. So we're going to skip ahead to the next difference. And just give you more context before I skip ahead. So that's the first main adaptation, is there's the principal who comes up and leads the people in a special prayer at this point in the Mass. The next major adaptation coming up involves incense.
Okay.
So traditionally in the Mayan culture, incense plays an important role. People view it as a means of purification, a means of showing honor and respect. And usually in the traditional Mayan cultures, incense is administered by women. Usually it's seen as one of the role of women to incense things. So one of the main adaptations here in this particular Mayan usage is that there is a place for incense to be administered by women incensers. And again, they're chosen by the pastor and approved by the bishop. So we're going to see them incensing immediately before the gospel reading. And again, they're using a bowl type censer. And some people were commenting that these bowl type censers are associated with paganism. Well, all censers were associated with paganism at one point.
Right. That's what I'm thinking right now. It's just, do people really not understand church history? Is that really what's happening here?
So I'm going to skip ahead to this. And this is about 35 minutes in, right before the gospel reading.
Okay.
It's very brief. You see she lays down in front of the altar, and then at that point, they go right into the gospel reading. All right. So that's that adaptation, is the offering of the incense by the women. Now, some people were very concerned about this because they felt it gave an official liturgical role to women, and they saw this as opening the door to women's ordination. Maybe, maybe not. What I would say is that a person can argue against that and say, this is not prudent. There may be good reasons not to do this.
Mhm.
And, whether these adaptations are prudent or not is debatable. I think there are legitimate reasons to be concerned. I know myself as a Byzantine deacon, I'm the one who does most of the incensing. Having an official woman appointed to do incense at a Roman mass could be interpreted as a step towards women's ordination, I suppose. Not necessarily, but it could be interpreted that way. But that doesn't mean that what's taking place here is pagan and demonic.
Yeah, that's certainly fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's that. That's the end of that. Now,
Okay.
the third major adaptation takes place at the end of the liturgy, where parishes have the option of doing a dance of thanksgiving following communion. So what would happen is they'd give out communion, and then after that, parishes have the option, it's optional, to do a brief dance of thanksgiving. And in some places, that's an important way of showing thanks and praise. Now, this community does not do it. And I watched several of their videos. At no point do they do any dancing in this particular parish. They choose not to exercise that option. So there's no video footage of that anywhere that I could find.
Okay.
But that's that. Other than what we just showed you, it's a normal Novus Ordo Roman Catholic Mass with nothing extraordinary going on.
Okay.
Some people were arguing that there are too many women at the altar in the sanctuary. People can argue about that, but again, that doesn't mean that it's a pagan demonic ceremony promoting idolatry. As you can see, the adaptations in the grand scheme of things are pretty minor. Pretty minor. There's 3 things. One of them is optional, doesn't even occur in this parish. The other 2 things are the prayer from the principal at the beginning and the woman offering incense. And incense is offered again later on after the consecration of the Eucharist. And that's it. Otherwise, it's a normal Roman Catholic Novus Ordo Mass. That's all of it. That's it.
Yeah. So not really anything substantial here.
No, it's definitely not a pagan, idolatrous liturgy intended to promote polytheism. Unless the words of that prayer from the principal are shockingly polytheistic. You got to prove that. But I found that hard to believe.
Right. Yeah. The burden of proof will be on, somebody who makes that claim. They're going to have to produce evidence.
So now I have one more video I want to show. I'll get the next one loaded up here.
Okay.
And before I load it, some context on the next one.
Okay.
The next video is simply me scrolling through the Facebook page of this particular parish. Because as far as I can tell, the diocese there has no Facebook presence or social media presence. They don't even have a web page that I could find. But this particular parish, which is in the heart of the diocese, has a social media presence. They have a Facebook page. And you can often tell a lot about what's going on in a parish based upon what they're posting on Facebook.
Yeah.
So I want to show you what's on their Facebook page here to get a sense for what's going on.
Okay.
So again, the fear is that the whole purpose of this liturgical usage is to get people worshiping the Mayan gods, to make worshiping the Mayan gods equal or overcoming or greater than worshiping the triune God of Christianity. So let's see how that's reflected on the Facebook page.
Okay. I see another screen that you're sharing here. You want me to add it?
Yes. Make it the main screen. There we go. So this is video footage I took here of their Facebook page. And it's just going to scroll through and show a few things. But what you're going to see here is what their priorities are. So at the top is the banner, and they have a picture of a deacon who died, a beloved deacon from the parish who passed away. That's the header. But take a look at what actually is posted on the Facebook page. What we want to look for is this. Again, this is one of the main parishes in the heart of the diocese that's spearheading this initiative, right? The bishop himself was there in the last video. One of the bishops who's the main architect of this. So let's see what they're promoting on the Facebook page. Are they promoting worship of the Mayan gods? Are they promoting polytheism and idolatry?
Okay.
So there we see footage of a biblical movie. There's a statement from the Gospels, something from the book of Romans, evangelization videos. There's one of their masses or liturgical services, another one, another one. There's a movie about Jesus. They have another clip from a movie about Jesus, another liturgical service, There's their band who performs during the
Mm.
masses.
Mhm.
Another clip about a movie, another clip from a movie about Jesus, yet another one. There's another liturgical service, another Jesus movie,
Mm.
another Jesus movie, liturgical services, yet another Jesus movie. A lot of Jesus movies. If you go through this, this is full.
There's a lot of those, huh?
Right. And here are the photos they posted. This is in the past
Okay.
few months,
Juan Diego, yeah.
yeah, a lot of quotes from the Gospels, quotes from the letter to the Hebrews,
Mhm.
a lot of crosses, a lot of crucifixes,
Mhm.
picture of the deceased deacon again.
Mhm.
It keeps going, again, more Gospels, Bible readings, quotes from saints, pictures of Jesus, Isaiah, another picture of Jesus with a quote from the Apocalypse. That's
Mhm.
it. That's the video. But
Mhm.
if you look at what's on their Facebook page, you get the pretty clear idea that they're worshiping somebody,
Uh-huh.
Jesus.
Yeah.
It seems the whole
Right.
thrust of the parish is they're worshiping this guy called Jesus.
Right.
I didn't see any mention of any Mayan gods anywhere on the Facebook page, but a whole lot of mentions of Jesus, a whole lot. So this is the experiment here, right? This is the place where this is coming from.
Uh-huh.
And it seems they're very dedicated to worshiping this guy named Jesus. I'm not sure there's room there to worship Mayan gods.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, unless somebody is going to want to say, oh, well, that's part of the conspiracy is to make it look like they're really Christians, but they're going to try to introduce this idolatry. The burden of proof is going to have to be on a person who says that. So I think the biggest thing that we saw here is, can you have a censer that is in the shape of a bowl? Which, if you read the Apocalypse, the answer is yes. And then
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
then number two, can you have a layman lead a prayer during a certain part of the liturgy? I think that's kind of the biggest question at this point. Well, I mean, I guess somebody could say, well, should a woman bring out the incense?
Mhm.
At one point in service. I
And,
guess those are the main questions at this
and
point.
those are fair questions for debate,
Mhm.
whether or not that's prudent. But that's a far cry from whether or not this is promoting idolatry.
Yeah, it's certainly possible that these things could be done without sin, but is it prudent? Is it the best thing in an atmosphere of people who are pushing for women's ordination and stuff? Yeah, that's a legitimate concern that some may have.
Right.
And with some who are trying to blur the lines between the ministerial priesthood and the priesthood of all believers, some might say it's not the best idea to have a layman lead such prayers. I could
Right.
see somebody say that in that context. So again, those are debates that one could have, but notice we're having a debate in that realm, not in the realm of this is pagan, this is idolatry, this is departure from the worship of the one true God.
Yeah, for what I see, it's pretty much a typical Roman Catholic Novus Ordo Mass with three possible additions that don't in any way alter the character of the Mass. Now, again, people can object to what's going on here for legitimate reasons. One objection I heard, which I think is a legitimate one, is this. The Vatican has been cracking down on the traditional Latin Mass, and one of the reasons given is they want to have unity in the Roman Rite.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are trying to push for greater unity in the Roman Rite, why are you allowing specific adaptations to certain regions? That seems to contradict that. And I think that could be a legitimate argument.
I think that I'm honestly not convinced that the primary motive for the restrictions on the Missal of 62 on part of Pope Francis is because of uniformity. It really seems like he indicates that it's because some people are taking that missal, which is fine in and of itself. It's good in and of itself, but they're taking it and they're trying to use it as a banner and as a weapon against the post-conciliar church, the magisterium, the Novus Ordo liturgy. And so they're trying to weaponize that missal. And so in order to take the ground from under their feet, he says, okay, well, now I'm going to restrict it. Now, one might say, okay, well, this isn't the best way to deal with that group, perhaps. But I think that that's where he's coming from. And frankly, with the way that many in that group have responded and are behaving, You could totally understand why Pope Francis is doing this and has that impression of this crowd. Not that
Yes,
everybody
yes.
in that crowd is that way. I'm just saying.
I would say that. I would say that. I personally have no issue with the Latin Mass. It's not something I personally seek out, but at the same time, I could think it can be beautiful. But I think one of the issues here is that very often the people who gravitate towards it become radicalized. And I think that's perhaps what's concerning so many bishops and concerning the Pope. And unfortunately, the way some of them are behaving is proving him right, I'm afraid. When you have news sites posting all kinds of slander and lies with no desire to find the truth, and they're raving about how evil Pope Francis is because he's taking away the Latin Mass, and they go on to call him an idolater promoting paganism, that just adds fuel to the fire, and that just proves that argument to be right. So it's a complicated thing altogether. But what I saw was a lot of the websites that were furious about this potential usage were immediately connecting it with the persecution of the Latin Mass. They're connecting them. Pope Francis wants to persecute the followers of the Latin Mass, yet he wants to create a whole new rite for Mayans. And some of the articles were saying, and I saw one today that said this, that Pope Francis wants to create a brand new rite for Mayans, while at the same time he is actively persecuting and suppressing the mass of the church. The mass of the church. And talk about being the mass of the whole Catholic Church.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, not the Eastern half.
Yeah, but this is the problem. You have Latin Rite supremacists that are very explicit about Latin Rite supremacy.
Yeah.
And that's certainly an issue. They look on the Eastern churches as something to be tolerated, if anything.
Yes, it was something else. One of the articles I read about this was, having a fit over the woman with the incense, and it was saying, and it said very strongly in there, incensing is the explicit job of the priest. If anyone other than a priest is incensing, it's taking away from the priesthood, and it's compromising the faith. And I'm thinking, I'm a deacon, and I'm the guy handing the incense 90% of the time.
Yeah.
Even in the Roman Rite, the deacons are usually the ones who incense.
Yeah. What I think, again, what's going on is, I think some people are overreacting. Perhaps they're concerned with Protestantism that undermines and downplays the ministerial priesthood, or just altogether rejects it. And so to compensate for that, there's an overemphasis on the role of the priest. And it's partly understandable. Again, it's kind of there to offset the Protestant reformers and their errors. But I think sometimes people go a little too far with it.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Now, there are some chat questions here that I wanted to grab.
Great.
Thank you for the super chat. Yeah, and by the way, y'all put them to @Reason and Theology, and we'll take them. This is from Mahovel. Church approved historically modified rites, per example, Glagolitic rite in Croatia, which existed all until Novus Ordo Mass. I'm not familiar with that. Have you heard of that before in Croatia?
I've never heard of that one, no, but I've heard of a number of different variations or usages of the Roman Rite that existed up until the time of the Novus Ordo.
Pop says, please convey our warmest wishes to Father Deacon, who has actually suffered some persecution and attacks, none of which he deserves. I respect his intellect and genuine love. Yeah, can you, I know you're not going to go into details on who, but can you tell us a little bit about what are the criticisms that have been leveled against you?
That I'm defending the indefensible. That's the main one. That I'm actively trying to defend the acts of idolatry and the promotion of paganism.
Yeah. Well, that sounds familiar. I remember when this all started for me was when I simply raised some questions about the narrative concerning Pachamama. Simply raised questions, and I was immediately publicly accused of defending demon worship.
Yeah.
That's when I said, wait. If people could twist me that badly, I wonder if they're doing it to Pope Francis. I wonder if they're doing it to their local bishop. I wonder if they're doing that in their articles that they're writing for news websites as a contributor. I wonder if they're doing that on their YouTube show to other people. And sure enough, I started digging in. Yeah, that's exactly what they were doing.
If they're twisting your words and they're twisting my words, perhaps they're twisting the Pope's words too.
Yeah, so I realized, okay, I see what's going on.
But ultimately, the little bit of persecution I'm enduring is just a nuisance. I mean, there are Christians around the world facing true persecution for their faith. So I should count it blessed to have this little taste of minor annoying persecution.
Yeah,
because it's ultimately it's a blessing. It's a blessing.
Again, y'all put chat questions to @Reason and Theology. I see a lot of comments, very active in the comment section, but I need y'all to put some chat questions in there. Ask anything related to this stream. So when you were doing your research at the end of the day, nothing really was concerning for you. I mean, there was nothing that you saw about this that made you say, I don't know, this could be a problem.
I mean, there are some things. Again, the woman with the incense, that maybe that could be part of an agenda. I doubt in that case it is, because from what I read elsewhere in the Mayan culture, women incensing the home is an important ritual. I doubt there's an agenda there, but I guess that could be twisted possibly. One could argue the wisdom of having a layman lead a long prayer in the middle of the beginning of the mass like that. But again, questioning the prudence of those liturgical choices is very different than saying they're promoting idolatry.
You didn't
I don't
see
any evidence of idolatry. None.
Yeah, so you didn't see any idolatry.
None. And I watched 2 of these videos from that from that particular site, and I also watched a video of Pope Francis celebrating an adapted Mayan mass back in 2016, and the only real difference there was it had the women with the incense, but otherwise it was a typical Novus Ordo mass.
That was it.
That, as far as I could tell, yeah.
There's another question here. Let me grab it. What do you think about the music?
Well, the music lover in me found it really catchy. I have to admit, as I was watching these videos, I was kind of enjoying the music. That being said, that's not the music that I personally like to hear in church.
Sure.
I tend to enjoy music that involves a lot of chanting.
Yeah.
Possibly even in dead languages.
Yeah.
Church Slavonic in my case. I like that kind of stuff, but it's not the music that I would want to have in church. But at the same time, if it's music from their culture and it's not distracting or detracting from the worship of God, I'm not sure we can really condemn it either.
And for them, it won't be distracting.
No, I will say this: I've heard far worse music in many American parishes than I heard in those videos.
Well, that's true. Do you think this adaptation of the mass will work?
I don't know. It's an experiment, right? They're saying it's an experiment and it's a proposal at this point. I guess we'll know if it's successful if it kind of turns around the mass exodus to the evangelical churches. We'll see. Will it work? I don't know. One of the articles I read about this, I forget the author, but he was a priest who was trying to be very reasonable about it. One of the few reasonable articles I saw. And he was saying that he wasn't sure if this would work or not, but he thought that in many cases, a reverent celebration of the Novus Ordo, as it's intended to be celebrated, would draw people in, both people in enculturated places that need acculturation, but also people who are gravitating towards the Latin Mass. He seemed to think that a lot of these problems could be solved by a reverent celebration of the Novus Ordo without having to change the text or adapt it in any way. Maybe, maybe not. Time will tell.
I'm not sure I'm following this question. Hallelujah asks, can we consider this a form of Neo-Pelagianism? I've seen people accusing others of worshiping demons or doing demonic practice without knowing it. Is that possible? I'm not sure I'm following the connection with Neo-Pelagianism. But care to comment on that one?
Neo-Pelagianism, that would be the idea of working your way to heaven through your own merits. Is that correct?
Right. And so I guess I'm not seeing how that ties into an accusation of worshiping demons.
I don't know. But is it possible to worship demons without knowing it? Is that a question there as well?
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, I'm sure it probably is. I'm sure there are people who are participating in ancient rituals their families taught them that are worshiping demons and don't know it. But
Mhm.
in the context of what's going on in that mass that we watched, I didn't see any evidence of that.
Mhm.
It seemed to me it was very focused on Jesus.
Mhm. Mahovel, thank you for the super chat. He adds a second super chat here saying it was Latin Rite in Church Slavonic Croatian dialect. It had special type of music based on traditional music that is still being used for Novus Ordo. Okay.
That sounds kind of cool.
That's new for me.
Yeah.
So was not familiar with that. Um uh Still looking through the chat here to see if there was anything else. I think we may have grabbed them all. I'll give y'all one more chance to put some more there in the chat. Make sure to put them to at Reason and Theology. Yeah, what I noticed over and over when I looked into this, although I didn't study it as extensively as you have, but when I looked into it, I noticed a couple things. Number one, the accusations of idolatry. And what I'm noticing is that people think if you incorporate something from a culture into the liturgy, it's automatically idolatrous. That's already flawed and hypocritical if you know your own Roman Rite. And then I noticed that there was this emotional argumentation being used saying, this isn't okay. And then a person will show a picture of the Missal of 62. This isn't okay, but this pagan idolatry of Pachamama and Mayan worship is okay. So you can't have this, but you can have this idolatry. And I imagine that's actually convincing for a lot of people, that those kinds of emotional arguments. But you know what it reminds me of, and because you just read my book on answering orthodoxy. Uh, One of the most common arguments that you hear against the Catholic Church by lowbrow Orthodox apologists is, well, you guys have clown masses. And as dumb of an argument as that actually is, when we just consider it intellectually, it actually is very persuasive to many people because they're being driven more by emotions than they are their intellect. And that's kind of what this reminded me of. Somebody to say, well, you can't have this TLM, but you can have this Pachamama and Mayan idolatry. I saw that over and over.
It was definitely an appeal to emotion. And the
Yeah.
book, by the way, for those who are listening, is awesome.
Thank you.
When
I
it comes
appreciate
out,
that.
buy it. I'm buying it as a gift for friends. It's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah. They're I mean, I don't have a due date yet, but they're looking to move pretty quickly on this. And
Well,
so,
it's badly needed. In the past 6
Mhm.
months, I've been contacted by many Latin Mass loving Roman Catholics who are seriously thinking of going to the greener pastures of the Orthodox Church. And I've tried to explain to them why, if they go there looking for perfection, they're not going to find it. Having a book like yours to give them would be a godsend.
Because that's kind of the intention is to address Catholics who are dissatisfied with the Catholic Church and they're tempted to go to Eastern Orthodoxy. And I'm saying, wait, hold on, pump the brakes on that, because a lot of the things that you're dissatisfied with are already there in Eastern Orthodoxy. So you're just
Yeah.
going to be confronted with the same problems. And so,
A lot of people are being very naive on this. And especially they're angry because the Roman Rite, the Latin Church, is not allowing for diversity. It won't tolerate their love of the Latin Mass. So they're going to a church that uniformly insists upon the Byzantine Rite. There's a whole lot less diversity.
It tends to despise the Western Orthodox,
Right.
by the way.
There are some Western Orthodox parishes, and they are definitely not looked upon favorably by most Orthodox. It just seems like, you're going from the frying pan into the fire, so to speak. But I think what it is they're looking at a very idealized perception of the Orthodox Church as being pure and perfect. And your book is fantastic because you don't say anything negative about the Orthodox.
Right.
What you do is you just present information and facts in a way that shows that they've got their issues too.
Yeah. I'm just saying the argument that you present against Catholicism fails. And by the way, it's usually an argument that works against you as well.
Exactly. You do that masterfully. And it's important for people to realize that, because there's so much anti-Catholic polemics coming from the Orthodox right now. It's ridiculous. And most people don't know how to respond to their arguments. what I love in your book is you lay out the arguments. You have them laid out. You clearly explain them in a way that's easy to understand, and then you refute them, and it's perfect. It's perfect.
I appreciate that, and I'll have some dates for y'all soon, so y'all look for that. Again, that's a book on answering Eastern Orthodoxy. There are a few more questions here. Let me grab those. What do you consider a reverent Novus Ordo? Because you were talking about that earlier. Maybe define reverent Novus Ordo.
I experienced one just about 3 weeks ago that was awesome. I don't experience the Novus Ordo very often because I'm assigned to 2 parishes. So pretty much every Sunday and Holy Day, I'm at a Byzantine parish that I'm a deacon at. But I do get to experience the Novus Ordo at least 2 or 3 times a year at my college. I teach at a Roman Catholic college, and I will assist as deacon at the masses on special occasions. So like typically every year, the Roman Catholic bishop will come and I'll serve as the deacon, and he's awesome. They do a beautiful job for that. About 3 weeks ago, my family was invited to the local Franciscan friary because one of our friends was being professed as a Franciscan friar. This was at Loretto, Pennsylvania. It's kind of the hub of the TOR Franciscans. They're the same ones who run Franciscan University of Steubenville. So I was at their friary, and they had this mass during which these 3 novices were being professed as the next rank after novice. I forget what it's called. Postulant. Is that what it is? And the mass was just stunningly beautiful. It was stunningly beautiful. They had gorgeous singing, wonderful chant. They had incense. I mean, it lifted my heart to heaven just as much as any divine liturgy does. And, I've experienced that more than a few times. The Novus Ordo could be done in a way that's very beautiful. I think the problem becomes when the Novus Ordo is treated as the priest's personal self-expression rather than the worship of God. I think that's when it's a problem, or when it's treated as the congregation's vehicle of expression. The Mass is not about the priest expressing himself or the congregation expressing themselves. It's about worshiping God. And when it's approached that way, I think it's usually done very well.
Yeah, I've seen great Novus Ordo liturgies. And I've also seen them celebrated poorly,
I've seen more than a few of those, unfortunately.
Yeah. So my criticism there is not so much the Novus Ordo itself, objectively considered, but more the way some people are celebrating it.
Yes. Yes.
Brandon, thank you for the super chat. The same people complaining about this likely will also complain about the Mexican Day of the Dead celebrations their cultural supremacy is showing. What do you think of the Mexican Day of the Dead celebrations? Any comments there?
They can be approached in a way that is ultimately, harmless, or even, Christian, in the sense that you're praying for the deceased loved ones. But like anything else, they can also be, those celebrations can be used in a way that is non-Christian. That can happen as well too.
Yeah. I think we grabbed everything from the chat there, so we'll go ahead and end it there. Any parting words? Anything that you wanted to touch on that we didn't get to, or any plugs that you want to put in?
I just want to say that when I first approached the story, the first thing I did was read the articles and watch several videos warning about this. And the level of alarm in the videos and in the articles was pretty high. I mean, they were really sounding the bells of alarm. And when I actually found the interview with one of the architects explaining what was in it, and I actually watched several videos of it, I was kind of, I don't know, I want to say let down, but I was kind of just like, that's it? That's it? I mean, it was such a non-story. And I was just amazed with how it was, taken to this whole level of heresy and paganism and idolatry. It just seemed like quite a stretch.
I think people are dissatisfied with Pope Francis. Some of the dissatisfaction is justified. Some of it is misplaced because it's based on misinformation and bad news sources that they've been reading. But either way, they're very dissatisfied with Pope Francis, and so they've lost giving him all of the benefit of the doubt, and they're just looking for something to crucify him with. It reminds me very much of the Pharisees and the way they treated Jesus. They didn't like what Jesus was saying to them and condemning them and exposing them of their sins. They didn't like that. And so they looked for some kind of charge and accusation to level against him and the disciples. Oh, you guys are breaking the Sabbath, and oh, you're a blasphemer, and all kinds of just trumped up charges. And that's exactly what it reminds me of at this point when I start to look at the accusations.
That's a good analogy. It's a good analogy. And what saddens me is that people doing this are doing it in the name of Christ.
Yeah, which I've found to be interesting, since we serve the God of truth, but it doesn't seem that truth is a priority right now, because we have other things driving our priorities. Namely, let's crucify Pope Francis.
Like I said, we have to be disciples of Christ before we're disciples of an ideology.
And I say that, also saying that I'm not really a fan of this pontificate. I'm not.
There are legitimate criticisms. There are legitimate criticisms.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of this pontificate, as well as some others in the post-conciliar era. But that being said, I also recognize when people are engaging in slander and accusing Pope Francis falsely.
What frustrates me is I want people to seek truth, and I've encountered so many people who are presented with evidence, and they still refuse to accept truth.
I've noticed that. You know where I've noticed that the most? Your video in responding to the Pachamama issue, which I put in the show description here that y'all need to go and watch. I've presented that to people, and they've been confronted with the facts and still will persist in the accusation that it was idolatry, even though it's baseless. They don't have any evidence for that. They find that easier than just saying, I was wrong, I was rash, I falsely accused, I engaged in bearing false witness, and I repent of that.
Yeah.
So
it's frustrating.
That's what I'm noticing.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, setting the record straight on this one. Again, I recommend everybody go and check out the video that Father Dragani and I have done on Pachamama. I included that in the link or in the show notes. Also, check out the one on Canada. That one was fascinating. The Canada service that, people were saying Pope Francis was engaged in idolatry. Even when I initially watched it, I was very, very confused and thinking, okay, this looks really suspect. But then when you explained it, I realized, oh wow, okay, that makes sense. And then this one. So hopefully these three will really help people who are concerned that Pope Francis is somehow trying to introduce idolatry in the church. So once again, thank you so much for coming on and doing this and setting the record straight.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Everybody hit the like button and the subscribe button. Also check me out, patreon.com/Reason to Theology, if you want to support what I'm doing here. All right. We'll see you later. God bless. Hey, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, the like button, and if you want to support the channel, visit patreon.com/Reason and Theology.